The Bliss Business Podcast, the show about empathy, connection, and consciousness in business. Today's episode is brought to you by Zero Company, your paid search, social media, and programmatic ad experts.
Welcome back to the show. How can good companies remain good when they're working with a variety of vendors and suppliers? That's the topic today. I'm Steven Skash here once again with Tulio Siragusa and Ashmar. Hey guys. So I went on this hike with my dog this past weekend, about 3 miles up and down. It was, he's 16 and a half years old. He's an old guy, but he motors along really well. There's over a suspension bridge, there's a waterfall, and he's working hard, but beating us for sure, all the way up there, running circles around us. And we were just commenting on how spry and active he always is, and his exercise routine and his diet. And he struggled a point with dog food, where we're just now making our own, and that's the only way he can kind of keep it down. But we were talking about that dog food industry, and so it's in such chaos at times. You've got this new organic food coming on the line. They don't know what's organic and what isn't. They're trying to define that. They're trying to define what dog food is, whether it's dog food or dog feed or pet food feed. There's a difference there, and the states have all different rules, and the federal government has rules. And then you got the Supreme Court coming in here with this, getting rid of the Chevron doctrine a few days ago, where gave agencies some ability to clear up all this vagueness. So anything and everything related to this industry and this particular niche is just 1,000 times more confused now. And so my question in all of this is, why can't corporations just be good? And why can't we just have...
Why can't we be friends?
Yeah, why can't we just be friends? Why do we need all of this? I mean, if profits are the sole social responsibility, the sole pursuit of business, as Milton Friedman, influenced everyone decades ago to think, will the consumers be taken care of, or will they be taken advantage of for, as long as a corporation can?
Here's the way I see it. The fact that you have to have regulation to help you serve the needs of consumers better, then you have to go and expend all this energy, both resources and money and everything, to get an alignment, versus just doing the right thing from the beginning and creating a model where people actually enjoy doing business with you because you're providing a quality product or service, that then you don't have to go and pivot or make changes to do a good job. So my philosophy is build a business for the long haul. Remember the idea of the village, where everybody knew the shopkeeper, and whether you had a good reputation or not, it was instant and far-reaching. I just think it's a question of pride, in serving the needs of people. And I think some companies forgot why they started to begin with, and they've just become a machine. I mean, some of the stuff they put in the foods or products are downright dangerous. Just why? Just because it's filler and it's cheap and makes more profit. Like, find another way to make more profit, right? Improve your supply chain, improve your other infrastructure so that you can do better. But don't poison people. It's probably a good policy to have, Yeah. But then it comes down to, like we've been discussing, if a company doesn't have a purpose, then they're going to be like a leaf on a tree with the wind blowing. They're just going to go left and right and, go with the trends, so to speak, right? And the wind is really the investor. So they'll just be like, whatever the investors want, we go. Versus companies that are more rooted, have some purpose, deeply rooted, like a strong tree, that lasts hundreds of years. Their mindset's different. It's not just how they deal with their employees and their customers, but even the vendors they do business with, who they choose to do business with, who they procure products from and services from. It all comes in alignment because it's something meaningful to them as a business. So from my perspective, companies that struggle with this, the fact that you have to have regulation, it just means they're like a leaf on a tree, just being blown with the wind. The wind change. It's sad.
Yeah.
Actually, if I'm just solely concentrating on profits, will that stuff take care of itself? Like, oh, I can't just, get away with this because it'll catch up to me and it'll ruin profits. Therefore, profits should just be the sole purpose again. Or is there something there where it's just like, hey, as long as we can cover this up, we're good?
I was going to just add, time and time again has shown that there's ebbs and flow in profits too. Markets are up, markets are down. There's no consistent always up. So again, it's this idea of being blown about with the wind. You're going to go up, you're going to go down, and you think you have control over it. You don't. No. You just don't. So anyway, I just take the high road and do the right thing, period.
Yeah. And typically people, when they put their hands on a quality product, they build that relationship with you as a business. I think one of the companies that learned this the hard way was Apple, back when they let go of Steve Jobs, and they really focused on marketing products that they thought, well, this is what the consumer wants, this is what made money. Let's focus on maximizing those profits, not putting the time and the necessary effort into the quality of the product. During that time too, which was interesting, Steve Jobs was creating Next, which was the interface that he created for the Macintosh. But he spent 10 years not making a single dollar on Next until the time came where Apple had no choice but to take a stance and make a move and shift, or they're going to lose their business. And then when Steve Jobs came in, you could see that he really did build a relationship with the consumer by sharing the experience that went into the products, that the decisions that were being made, and then sharing the quality that went into each thing. When the person got that product, they really felt connected to it, right? That's the best example when you talk about one of the most profitable companies in the world today, Apple, following that foundation.
So let's talk about Apple for a minute and get back to kind of how it relates to the supply chain and purpose. They had a huge problem with a main supplier in China, and I think we probably all know some of the stories there. But long hours, low wages, poor living conditions, to say the least, on some of that stuff. But this again brings us into that area where what happened here? Was it a lack of purpose with them, or was it a lack of kind of seeing this vendor relationship as a partnership? What do you guys think as far as Apple? And we talked about this good company, and people love them, and they've got good consumer products and relationship with consumers, but then this comes along. Where did this break down?
That's a great point. And I'm going to I want Tully to speak on this, because although he cared about the customer approach, he cared about what he was creating for the customer so much that he didn't care about the partnerships he made internally. There are stories where even Steve Jobs is famous for screaming at his employees. Now, I don't know if that was the case so much so after the fact, but the supply chain was a big issue where those employees in China, there's some stories where some of them were mentally not doing well. There was suicide that had occurred. There's a lot of those stories that came about that the way those companies were treating their employees wasn't great, but Apple had those partnerships with those companies. I guess the question is, where do we draw the line?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's, there's also the difference between a good vendor and be a great partner. And that's ultimately the way to go. If your vendors are not treating people correctly, like the situation, then you ought to step in and do something about it, or pull away the business. I remember when Silicon Valley had this whole initiative, a bunch of founders signed this petition saying that they wouldn't do business with a company that did not have a diversified board of directors, right? It was a big thing. It made the paper. And some of them actually stuck to that. Many of them just kind of use it as a nice PR thing. But it spoke volumes about wanting to align change in support of whatever purpose was in place at the time in the space, in the tech industry in Silicon Valley. So, if you're going to be okay with cheap labor somewhere and not worry about the labor laws, I don't know what that says about you as a brand, but ultimately people will find out, and that can really destroy your reputation. Not to mention, it's probably not a good business practice. But if you do something about it, maybe you didn't know about it, but then you do something about it, then what does it say about you as a brand? That you care about people enough that you're not going to just let even the vendors who are not part of your company really, but they enable your company to be successful, matter to you. So I think it's an example of having priorities straight, and it really comes down to just, do you care about people, and those people are not exclusive to your business or your company. They're not just your employee. It's people in general. Anyone that touches your business is people.
And it's interesting too. I think today's time, now that the focus has been on, how people are being treated, mental health, and so on. I know that became a big issue. I know a lot of supply has moved to Mexico now, but I know that there's outside variables that are involved in that transition. But with that said, I could imagine things have changed since. I guess the question comes in, I think there were certain things, it kind of goes back, and I don't want to take us digress too far or go too back, but let's just talk about, for example, there was a time of segregation, right? There are people that just didn't agree with it, but at the time they had to follow certain rules. And maybe there was elements that there was progress made, but they were still holding on to old beliefs or old systems that today would be looked at as, hey, you're an actual racist. But that was probably the better of how bad it was at the time. So for example, maybe there was an element of higher purpose being practiced, but at the time there was still a big push and focus on the shareholders, right? So although Steve Jobs may have had this approach that had a lot of love attached to his design and what he wanted to create for the world, there were some people affected at his mission where he had to focus on certain costs and keep certain supply chains, get the quality product. At the time, there may not have been an opportunity for him to be able to pull manufacturing elsewhere that aligns with values. Maybe at the time, maybe he didn't even think about it. Maybe he believed that his purpose was so much bigger that it was what he was willing to do to make sure the things that are getting done are aligning with that purpose. And that may have involved working with a vendor that gets him the labor costs that he needed, with the quality products and so on. Maybe he didn't even take the time to look at it. Maybe now today they would, right? Maybe Tim Cook has a different approach because of the time we're living in. So there's those factors as well. We've moved out of medieval times, but there were times that even though someone could have empathy, people had to still take drastic measures in terms of punishment that today would not be legal or allowed. So we have to think about the times and how we've evolved in consciousness and now where we're at, where I think Apple has picked up on that, right? But again, only time will tell.
Yeah, you go back into history and you talked about, okay, you had like the Civil War to kind of push through some of these human rights issues, but you still have like the South where now it's just you're arresting people and you're putting them in jail, and now you've got forced labor through prison labor. And for most of it, even today, I think people don't really understand how much of an impact that has on certain communities, but that businesses just can get away with that, with like, hey, this is forced prison labor, and we've got so many problems with our prison system, and the inequity there of who's being arrested and who's being put to labor again, haven't really come that far. And then, okay, so that's just the United States, but then you have a lot of companies where they go overseas, and you still got the same thing. You've got the prison camps making labor, and that's been an issue lately for certain Chinese companies that's popped up. So we're still kind of dealing with that. How about we take a look at like a good example of a company that was able to, it had its purpose and it wanted to work with vendors. And what I think of that, I think of Starbucks, or it's coffee farmers. And I think you mentioned Mexico. I think it was in Mexico where they've got their purpose, and they wanted to make sure that their coffee was sourced ethically. And so they went, to Mexico and worked with the farmers and saying, hey, this is how we need to have this done. And how can we do that? And how can we do it at the price we need? And how can we help, basically? Right. And it's really them working together until they came up with a solution that allowed them to ethically source their coffee and have better standards from their supplier. And I think what that really gets down to is it's the difference between a vendor and a partner, and you having your purpose aligned with those, right? Yeah. Tulio, let's talk about, you mentioned this a little bit. Let's talk about that difference between a vendor and a partner.
Well, I think an example of this would be, for example, Intel. right? When you look back, they had this. It was actually the first time a B2B2C company had a successful campaign, because Intel didn't sell anything direct to the consumer, but they provided chipboards and motherboards to the majority of the computers that we bought. So they went out and tell people, this whole campaign, Intel inside, Intel inside. And so they made a name for themselves. If you bought a computer that had an Intel chip in it, you were expecting it to be a higher quality computer, right? Contrast to Apple here, right? Mm-hmm. But so it was important to those companies that brought motherboards and hardware from Intel to make it well known, Intel inside. They leveraged that. There was a certain association of quality and great product that made a difference when people made a purchase decision, whether they chose one machine over the other. So now imagine they had a pretty high standard too for who can adopt their chips. So you can just be a computer manufacturer and stick an Intel chip in there or motherboard, and then everything else was awful on your machine, right? Because ultimately, even though Intel wasn't the manufacturer of the computer that you bought as a consumer, the one who would look bad upon would be Intel, right? So let's say I bought a Dell computer, but it's got an Intel inside. Well, the manufacturer's Dell, right? But if something was wrong with it, then I would think, oh, Intel's not good, right? I wouldn't say Dell is the problem. I would say Intel's the problem. They did a really great job in building momentum around the Intel inside strategy, but they also did a great job in making sure that they were put into machines that were worthy of that brand. Mm-hmm. And so this is just an old example of when vendors work as partners and they even promote each other, and it helps everybody win by providing a great product for the consumer. And their strategy helped to sell more PCs. I think the biggest competitor to Apple wasn't even like Dell, IBM, all the different manufacturer. It was Intel pushing this Intel inside strategy. And then, of course, Apple adopted the Intel chips as well. So it all came full circle. But that's one example I can think of where that partnership works symbiotically and it benefits both parties.
Yeah, I have to agree with that too. I mean, I when I read the biography of Steve Jobs, a lot of the relationships he built with his vendors is the only way I believe he got away with the reality distortion field. The things that he was forcing onto some of the vendors, especially with the glass that was being added to the screen, when he first was approaching vendors to build that glass, that would be essentially not impenetrable, but we'd be able to use our fingers as styluses. The things that he was requesting, multiple vendors were saying was not possible to do. Now, building that relationship and finding the right person and then telling them, hey, this is what needs to be done, and them saying, okay, we're going to try our best to make it happen. There was an element of relationship building there in that partnership. And then once he found those vendors, I can only imagine they really strengthened those relationships with Apple, where some of those vendors are still supplying the iPhones today. But to even segue from just manufacturing and supply, partnerships with other vendors, we have to think about, what do you guys think about this as well? Partnerships with clients for service-based businesses, and how I've found that there's, especially, let's just take the industry of digital marketing, for example, there are those agencies that still provide their services as a vendor to business relationship versus actually building a partnership. And I'm thinking that model is dying. I think what's happening now is that businesses are looking for agencies that they can actually partner with, that are providing them more value than simply a vendor relationship and a service. Being a specific service, they're looking more for soft skills and so on. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, this reminds me as well of what happened in the software industry. Like in the 80s, one of the biggest software companies at the time was SAP, still is a big software company, right? But they went out and sold all these solutions to banking and other industries. And then 70% of all those software failed because it was the idea that I could just run the software and help me run my business better. The problem with that is they're software companies. They're not banks. They're not manufacturers. So why would you have a software company run your business? It didn't make any sense. And then the big four consulting companies came in and said, hey, you know what? You kind of have, the software works if you customize it to your business workflows. So you've got to match up the way you do business so that the software can automate, can help you streamline things, can help you be more competitive. And they created a whole business model around this, which helped both the software companies as well as them as service providers. And again, another relationship where the Big Four consulting made billions implementing, customizing third-party software for SAP, for Oracle, and others, right? So eventually, what happens is if you have the right partnership, the right vendor relationship, it can make a whole difference in the world of whether you succeed or fail, right? You can have a great product, but if it's missing that partner, that additional component that brings it all together, then you're leaving it for the customer to figure out on their own, which is what happened in these first implementations, then you fail, right? And then you can have ultimately something that could have been great not work out. But this was, and eventually that partnership continues to be very active today. And, both of those companies will bring in each other and support each other. And it's a $1 trillion industry. So it's important to know that the right partnerships can make or break the relationship you have with the end buyer. It's such a critical thing to have in place. And having one where you're aligned in your philosophies, in your purposes, in your values makes a whole difference in the world. Because there's nothing worse than having a company that's trying to do good and a company that's just trying to kill it and make every dollar possible. It just, you're not jiving. It's like you're not even talking the same language at the table. So that's important.
I think the difference there might be that, when you're talking about a vendor in that scenario, it's transactional. It's transactional relationship. You can have a win-win, I think, with a vendor. Sure, you can have that all the time. Ideally, that's what you have. But when you're talking about when it's elevated to this level of, hey, now we want a partnership with you. We want to both align our purpose together and make sure we're on the same page with really just all parts of how you run your business, right? That's really what the key is. Otherwise, I'm, one of these fast fashion businesses, and I'm sending off stuff to, overseas, and now it's in some sort of sweatshop, and I'm getting good prices. Is a win for the sweatshop, and it's a win for me profit wise. But if you're just thinking of that short-term purpose, and cost cutting, and this is the only way to go, is this sort of transactional method versus your higher purpose for both of your companies. That's the real partnership. There's that higher purpose for both companies, right?
And it works both ways. I know one particular company, it was a HVAC company, $100 million business, nice sized business in the southern border of the East Coast of the US. And the son inherited this company and just ran it to the ground. He kept cutting corners. He kept buying, selling stuff for new, but then was really putting in used stuff. So the vendors that he was buying from changed. He went for low cost, cheap, trying to get more margin, trying to improve profits, all completely driven by greed. I mean, and inside of less than a year and a half, destroyed a $100 million company with lots of jobs that got impacted by that. Why? So you could put a few more dollars in your pocket. So, when you have set an expectation with people and you change a vendor, it can destroy the way you serve that customer if you don't have the right vendor in place. I mean, it's that dramatic of a difference. And you'll know it right away. Even at a restaurant, if they change the supplier of a certain recipe, it tastes different. And, patrons that go there on a regular basis, they'll know something's off here. It's not the way it used to be. And you're like, wait, but I saved an extra $5 on that block of cheese. But no one likes it. The mac and cheese you're making with that new cheese doesn't taste good. The kids don't want it. We're not coming back here. So, you saved a few dollars, but at what cost? The possible cost of a loss of a great loyal customer. It's not worth it, So it's very short-minded. I'll make a few bucks, but at what cost? There's a price to pay to make those few bucks when you make these kinds of changes. And sometimes the price to pay is greater than the savings you got.
I have to piggyback on what Tulio just shared, especially when regarding mac and cheese. I learned this recently. Did you know that grated cheese that comes in the bag, already grated, Do you notice when you actually take a block of cheese and you try to grate it and you put it into a bag, it gets all stuck and mushy together? That's how cheese is supposed to respond. That's the chemistry of the cheese. I just discovered recently that these companies that already have the shredded cheese where they're all separated apart naturally is done through a product. They call it cellulose. Don't name it. I don't even know what it's called. Something. Sounds like a natural food product of some kind, but it's actually wood shavings that has been discovered. And there's a viral video of a gentleman sharing this information. He's speaking at a grocery store. There's a line of people around. He's explaining to him that this is the ingredient right here. Oh, by the way, this is wood shavings. That's what's keeping the cheese separated from each other. That piece of information alone, I haven't bought a bag of cheese since.
Oh my goodness.
And you can only imagine how many other people who see a message like that may potentially impact them. Some might not care. Some people like myself, who was a loyal customer to grated cheese, already grated cheese, gone, right? And I think as time goes along, more of those truths come out about what are these products, what is going into making these products. People make their decisions based on that, right? Oh, I love these shoes, but what ends up actually making these shoes? Oh, someone actually was getting, abused in the workplace in order for this to be created. I don't know if I really want to, have that on me anymore. It's kind of a bad vibe, as my generation would say, and I think that's what we want to connect ourselves with, something that's more positive, that we align ourselves with our values.
Yeah, that goes back to that first question.
Sorry.
Why can't we be good companies? Julia, go for it. What were you saying?
I was going to say you're ruining shredded cheese for me.
Sorry, audience. Someone had to tell you.
What am I going to put on my potatoes?
I was today's year old when I discovered.
Then I was thinking, oh, cheese, a source of fiber. That's pretty interesting.
Right. You can do it that way, right?
Sorry, Stephen. Go ahead.
No, that's exactly the point, really.
Yeah.
It's like, what? What is going on? How did we get here? Why did
who thinks of this stuff? Like, who sits around thinking of this stuff? I think it's the same people who sit around about scamming you with extended warranties and stuff. I don't know. They're just like, put your creative thinking to something good, Like,
Julio, they cut costs 10%.
10%.
I cut 10. How did you do it? We're gonna shave some trees out in the backyard. We're gonna shave them down and put them right. It's
like, yeah,
that's a sustainable product. It's trees.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, I found out we could use sawdust, and the sawdust people don't know what to do with their sawdust.
It's still organic.
Yeah.
I don't know. And it's just like, yeah, and if you don't know about that as a consumer, it's only getting, I think just recently, it's just getting even more chaotic now with like, if you don't, how am I supposed to protect myself when companies are coming at me 1,000 different ways with all kinds of creative stuff in the name of what? In the name of that extra 5-10% profit. Right. And
the thing is that extra 5-10% doesn't make it to the workers or the people who then would go and spend. It's like who would feed the economy itself, which would perpetuate the continued success of those companies. It goes into a pool of a small, finite number of people who just, I don't know, hoard it, I guess, put it in the bank, but it doesn't benefit anybody. And ultimately it hurts your company because it doesn't come back. Like, do the right thing. People will spend money and then they'll put right back into it. You create more jobs, puts right back into it. That's a whole nother conversation.
That's a whole other podcast there.
But it does have a trickle-down effect. That short-term thinking has a trickle-down effect on the long-term in a negative way. It doesn't sustain long-term profitability. It doesn't. It just gives you that quick lift you need, and then you have to pay the piper, so to speak. Eventually, you got to pay the piper.
Yeah, and if everybody in the supply chain has this short-term thinking, one by one, and they're all just chasing the same pursuit of the profits and don't care so much about
economies.
It's just, you're just watering things down until it just gets worse, as worse it can be for the consumer, and most profit can be extracted from the consumer as well.
Yeah.
I don't know, guys. I think we could probably go on this topic for another half an hour. Maybe we will on the next episode, but
we should do a comparison of like the way it's done towards just absolute profit, maximizing profit, and the way it's done with empathy and love and care and people first, and see who outperforms the other. Now, we've talked about this. We know the answer to this, right? Those companies who operate with love and care outperform those other, shareholders. Yeah, I don't understand why people don't study that. Study that in your MBA course. I mean, seriously.
Let's do a bunch of good examples of partnerships and bad examples of partnerships.
Yes, let's do that. That'll be fun.
So, all right, so that's it for today's show. Thank you for listening. Keep trying to build that good company however you can. Don't put
sawdust
in sawdust.
Don't put sawdust in your business.
We will see you on the next Bliss Business Podcast.